I'm very excited to introduce tonight's presenter. Educated in a Yiddish-speaking yeshiva and holding a doctorate in Jewish intellectual history, Rabbi Moshe Waldoks taught at Wellesley, Hebrew College, and Brandeis before receiving smicha, or post-nominal ordination, by his mentors, Rabbis Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Arthur Green, and Everett Gendler. One of the hallmarks of Reb Moshe's career has been his activities as a bridge builder across cultures and faiths. A storyteller and stand-up comedian, he is the co-editor of the Big Book of Jewish Humor. Reb Moshe has used humor to animate his home synagogue, Temple Beth Zion. He lives in Massachusetts with his wife Anne and their 3 daughters. Reb Moshe, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Rachel, can I co-host so I can do some screen sharing?
You are already co-host, so you're good
great.
to go.
Okay, thank you.
You need to share your sound because we can't hear what's happening.
Okay, where do I get that?
Unshare,
Right.
and then click share screen on the bottom. It says share sound.
Okay, hold on. You're, let me see. At the bottom, hold on. I'll have to do this again. Hold on a second. Sound, I'm looking into it. The bottom is covered over, I see, by something. Hold on one second. Forgive me for this. Stop share. Okay.
Moses went to the mountain, and God spoke unto him.
Moses, this is the Lord thy God, commanding you to obey my law. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. A deaf man could hear you.
What?
Nothing, Gonish, forget it. Oh, Lord, why have you chosen me? What would you have me do for you?
I shall give you my laws, and you shall take them unto the people.
Yes, Lord! Wow. Lord, I shall give these laws unto thy people. Hear me! Oh, hear me! All pay heed! The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 15... Wait. 10 commandments for all to obey.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, good old Charlton Heston. Nice to see you all. A lot of nice faces out there. I have to stop some music going on somewhere. Hold on a second. They don't teach you this in rabbinical school at all, you know. Here I am again. Okay. So it's good to see all of you. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to see what we grew up on. We grew up on the Ten Commandments, if you remember, 1956. Yes, Charlton Heston. And everybody was told at yeshiva when I was there, don't go to see it, don't go to see it. It's a terrible thing to do, because if you see it, you'll be corrupting yourself in a very big and difficult way. But of course, that was not the case to be. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is a little bit about Jewish humor, and I think the Mel Brooks thing gives a very important, if you will, entryway to what I want to talk about. You may not know, but it's quite connected. The idea that Shavuot is the time of the giving of the Torah, and there's a wonderful midrash which will help me hopefully expand this a little bit for you. And it says, and Moshe brought the nation towards God from the camp, and they stood beneath the mountain, Tachtit Har. They stood beneath the mountain. The Rabbi Avidni Bar Chama said, this comes to teach us that God held the mountain over them like a barrel, saying, if you accept the Torah, it's good, it's fine. But if not, this will be your burial place. And Rava said, nevertheless, they re-accepted it. They re-accepted it voluntarily during Achashverosh's days. As it is said, the Jews fulfilled and accepted. They fulfilled what they previously had accepted. So our teachers tell us that there's a deep connection between Shavuot and Purim. And I think that's really an important thing for us to really realize, because, it is in Purim that we find the basis for a lot of what Jewish humor is.
We don't see the video.
Sorry about that video, but I wanted you to hear the song. That's from a wonderful show called For Your Consideration, which was created by Christopher Guest, that whole crowd, and of course Catherine O'Hara's in it, which you all know from Schitt's Creek, who's done a very fantastic job. So it's Purim, and what does Purim have to do with Revelation? Well, one of the things that Purim does for us, and I think it's very important, is that Purim gives us a chance to really reveal who we are. And that revelation of who we are is done in a very interesting way. It's through masquerade. And how is it possible through masquerade that we reveal ourselves? Well, I have a feeling when people pick costumes, and when they pick costumes, they tell me a lot about themselves. Now, I can find no, if you will, connection between the word revelation and revels, but it's quite clear that in revels there is revelation. And that's the connection that I wanted to make about the fact that ultimately Jewish humor, as it's often given a sort of a kitschy kind of interpretation, the Jewish humor is laughter through tears. But tell you the truth, if you have to have less tears, I agree to be less funny. It's okay. I'll be an Episcopalian for a couple of months. It'll be fine. But bottom line is that we have to really, really understand that what we are doing when we do Jewish humor is that we are continuing a very strong intellectual tradition that goes back, as I say, to the story of Purim. Now, what is the story of Purim about? It's a parody, P-A-R-O-D-Y. And parody is ultimately the basis of all Jewish humor. Taking something that you know, a text or an idea or a holiday or a custom or a ritual, and turning it over and over and over and over, and not accepting what you see as the only reality. And Purim is dangerous. It's a liminal holiday. It's like Mardi Gras, Carnival, and in that atmosphere of the bacchanalian, if you will, kinds of entertainments and the bacchanalian kind of pleasures, it's a dangerous time because you see, when you wear costumes, let's say you're dressed as the king, and let's say 14 other people at your Purim party are dressed as the king, and the king comes in, who's the king? And of course, Jews have always said that you got to be careful about kings because they always basically are really, you can see right through them. So Purim became a model for a lot of Jewish humor and became, and I can't do 3,000 years of the history of Jewish humor. But what I want to say is Jewish humor is not laughter through tears. It is about all aspects of life. It is anti-authoritarian. It basically has a message it tries to teach. It comes from the bottom up and not the top down. And what makes it really important ultimately is we have the right as a Jewish community, this is very important, we have the right to have as much stupidity in our community as any other community. And Baruch Hashem, thank the Lord, we're doing terrific. We have a lot of stupidity. But the point is, it's very difficult today to do humor because everything is so critically assessed. Is this somehow making fun of something that should not be made fun of, etc.? But Jewish humor had no limitations. You could make jokes about God, certainly jokes about rabbis. Oh, they were the butt of humor for a very, very long time. But Purim gave us also the beginnings of Jewish theatrical, if you will, presentation. In the Purim spiel, the Purim plays, which were like the commedia dell'arte, taking things from the Bible and making them into entertainments. And it was quite successful in the Purim spiel. It began first, of course, telling the Esther and Mordechai story, but then it moved on to other parts of the Bible. But more importantly, in the 19th century, if I can schlep you all the way to the 19th century, we had groups of people who were Purim spielers. They were Purim spielers. They spent all year setting up for Purim, writing Purim plays. And these people became the first people involved in the creation of Yiddish theater. And it really is a direct line, basically, from the Purim spiel to Jewish theater. And it was this wonderful line that really stays alive today. There are other factors I wanted to talk about, but I want to make it very, very, very clear. There's very few people that I can tell this joke to, but it's a Shavuos crowd. Here's the joke. Moses is on the mountain, and he hears a deep, resonant voice that says, Al tivashel gedi bechelev imo. Do not see the kid in the milk of its mother. And Moses looks up and says, does that mean we have to have 2 sets of dishes, milchiks and fleishiks? Do not see the kid in the milk of its mother. Does that mean we have to have an extra 2 sets for Pesach? Do not see the kid in the milk of its mother. Does that mean we have to have paper when we bring in Chinese? And finally, the voice says, okay, you win. Have it your way. And we've been having it our way for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, what I think is really important is to understand that having it our way has been really, really a real boon. That we really take that Torah and we are able to sort of turn it over. And Along with the Purim spiel, we got a whole thing called Purim Torah. Purim Torah took, let's say, the Kiddush, or took parts of the prayer book or parts of the other parts, and would make them into, if you will, a parody. Now, why did we allow this to happen? Well, Purim particularly had a very, if you will, cogent kind of a side to it. It says that after the Mashiach will come, and I promise you, we will survive the Mashiach, we survived everything else, all the holidays of the year will be canceled except for Purim. Except for Purim. Why Purim? Because Purim ultimately is what Yom Kippurim, the Day of Atonement, is called Yom Kippurim. Eventually, after the Mashiach comes, we'll not have the Yom Kippur that we have now of abstinence and of all kinds of rules and fasting. On the contrary, we will have a Purim, a time of revealing ourselves, a time of joy, and a time of simcha. That's the ultimate goal of, if you will, quote unquote, Mashiach Zeit. Mashiach Zeit is not a time that, we're going to be interested in anything else except living to the fullest of our lives and having as much potential for happiness, which I know Jews have a problem with, but happiness is indeed the goal. So over the years, we have different phenomena, and we're going to try to do a little bit of some things cursorily and some things in depth, and leave time for you to ask questions. There's a fellow who emerges in the medieval period who is the direct antecedent for the stand-up comic. The stand-up comedian today is now de rigueur. Everybody knows about stand-up. But at one time, it was not the case. There was a fellow called a Badchen. Badchen, that's spelled Badchan, for those who are taking notes. And a Badchen means a jester. Jester comes from the word bidicha in Hebrew, a jester. And this Badchen was someone who emerged out of Purim as a master of ceremonies person, as a person who sang songs and rhymes, made fun of people, insulted people, and everybody wanted to be insulted by the Badchen. If you weren't insulted, what am I, chopped liver? Yes, you're chopped liver. So that's the kind of stuff. And this went on for many, many Purims for centuries and centuries. And then also the Badchen got attached to another great event, the most important event in the life of the Jewish community. Yes, it's when the Federation calls you for an extra donation. No, the most important time in the Jewish community is a wedding, a Jewish wedding. Bar mitzvahs were never that important. You got an aliyah, you were 13, you had a schnapsel. If your parents had money, you went to yeshiva. If they didn't have money, you went to work. However, weddings were amazing. Now, you've heard the term Polish wedding. Well, that's true. You would have a wedding that would last 7 days. And there are some Orthodox Jews who still do this, the Sheva brachos, every night for 7 days. I'll explain why they do that. But when you have a 7-day wedding, what becomes very important is timing. Timing becomes hugely important. Remember, you didn't travel those days to go to an afternoon wedding at a hotel and come back home. You spent a week there. You had to bond the families. So timing was important. Like, when did you serve the soup? 2nd day, right? 3rd day, you served something else. The 4th day, something else. You had to stretch it. And one of the ways they did it was by having a Badchen perform. And this Badchen would be backed up by a klezmer group. Today, we take this all pretty much in stride, but then it was a pretty big deal. And he would do all kinds of rhymes. And then he had a very strange sort of ritual function, which is kind of interesting, kind of psychological function. Before the Choseh Kala would come to the chuppah. Now remember, if you were a person of some means in the 16th century, the 15th century, the 14th century, you would try to get your children married off as early as possible, right? Girls were married off at 14 or 15 to boys, 14 and 15. First of all, you didn't know how long you would live. You wanted to see grandchildren, you got them married off. And if you had some means, you could support the couple for many years. And that's called kest, eating kest. So you can imagine a young 14-year-old or 15-year-old bride and a 14 or 15-year-old chassan, and they've seen each other only for 20 minutes, maybe a year before the wedding, and they're nervous. You can imagine, they're nervous. Now, as you know, weddings in our tradition are not sacraments. Rabbi doesn't do anything. Don't tell anybody that, but rabbis do nothing at weddings. They're just to act like they're a rabbi at the wedding. The people involved in the wedding are doing it all. They're signing a contract. They're making a bond. They're doing it in the public. They're exchanging a gift, a ring, whatever it is. So you can't make that contractual agreement if you are under duress. And stress is under duress. So what the Batkin had a very interesting role, the stand-up comedian, if you will. He would go to the bridal tish, the bridal chamber before the wedding. And he'd see this nubile, beautiful young woman, and he would start singing, so mamishi, mamishi, mamishi. Mwah. You're so beautiful, you're so nubile, look at your bekel, right. Oh, frische maid, in 2 years you're going to look like your tante Basha, like a barrel. That got her going first. And then he started talking about all the relatives who were recently killed in recent pogroms. That was also a great thing to do. And why was that a great thing to do? Because in another 10 minutes, everybody is bawling. They're crying. And as we zooked of Yiddish, we say in Yiddish, a stein is a rup von Herzen, a stone is lifted from their hearts. And out of it comes a sense of calm. Stress is released. And that's a really important component of humor. Humor is a stress release. Puts you in some sense of confusion, perhaps, in a story, and then it trips you up, it gets you to laugh. And if you have a sense of humor, not everybody does, if you have a sense of humor, guess what? You are going to feel better. You'll kick in a few endorphins or something. So that's what the role was. The role of the Batkin was to constantly keep people in a sense of happiness and joy. Later on, this developed, as I say, into what we would today call stand-up comedy. Let me see if I can find something else I wanted to show you, but I'm having such weird stuff with the screen sharing. So I don't know what's going to happen here. It's an amazing phenomenon, the screen sharing. I'm sure it was made by Gentiles to mess up Jews, possibly. But if I can't find it, it doesn't matter. But let me just give you a few examples of people who have carried on this tradition. Well, we have, of course, the great comedians. How they developed is very interesting. And I'm now taking you, again, to the end of the 19th century. We're moving very fast here. So if you need some Dramamine, it's a good time to drop a Dramamine now. In the beginning, at the end of the 19th century, we began to see Yiddish theater. And Yiddish theater brought a tremendous amount of talent. And every program, every Yiddish play, particularly the ones that were schmaltzy, or they used to call shund, sort of, lower class plays, always had these stock characters. And many of these stock characters had stand-up routines, and they were very popular. And then what happened was, of course, an explosion of the immigrant community in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. And we begin to see a proliferation of all of these kinds of entertainments. And little by little, some of these actors go out on their own and they start doing one-man shows, stand-up comedians, and that begins to grow. And then you see a new phenomena, the phenomena of leaving the ghettos of the Lower East Sides of whatever city you've been in. There was always a Lower East Side of some kind, and making a move into the greater world. And then moving to the greater world was enhanced, obviously, when after the First World War, with the rise of radio and all other kinds of communications. I'll give you an example, which I think is really something all of you can grasp and all of you know. And that, of course, how many people know about the Marx Brothers? You may have heard of the Marx Brothers. And people, I remember there was a writer named Norman Cousins who was dying, and he said what he tried to do was to make his dying pleasurable. So he, instead of going to a hospital or a hospice, he rented a room in the plaza and did nothing but show Groucho Marx and Marx Brothers films. Saved a lot of money, by the way, being at the plaza. So the Marx Brothers is a good example. Here you have, there were four of them originally, but they wound up with three because the fourth guy was occasionally a straight man, Zeppo. But there was Groucho, of course, Julius Marx, and there was Chico, and there was Harpo. Now, if you look at each of those characters, you'll see that they are making a transition from that immigrant community into this new kind of urban community, which is predominantly very down on immigrants. Sounds familiar? Yes, every generation has that. We closed the doors, by the way, in 1924, and because we closed the doors to the United States, it was possible to exterminate the Jews of Europe. Those doors had remained open. It would have been a different world. So you have Groucho. Groucho is a parody of what? The successful banker. He wears tails, he has a big cigar, and he's making fun of those guys who are up in the towers of the Chase Manhattans and the Chrysler buildings. As a matter of fact, I had a woman on who was there, marvelous Margaret Dumont. And remember her? She looked like the Chrysler building. She represented, if you will, the WASP establishment. And Groucho Marx always ran around her and did all kinds of tricks. Later on, she did a couple of interviews, and she said she never understood what they were saying or doing. Her job was to stand there, and they did the rest. So Groucho was a parody of the guy who got off the boat a week before you and now is willing to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. And that was the kind of gutsy immigrants who wanted to sort of break in, and they couldn't break into the top, so they broke in at the bottom, and the bottom was show business. That's how you broke in. Why? Show business had risks. And people were not offering, as I said, jobs to be vice presidents of banks, so Jews took risks. And you have Groucho, the wise guy, the wordplay, very important Jewish humor, wordplay, much more than slapstick, even though there was a bit of slapstick. The second guy is Chico. Chico he's less interested in assimilation, maybe acculturation, but no assimilation. He wears his Italian-looking clothes. He wears the old European hat. He speaks with an accent. And he basically is smarter than Groucho in many, many, many ways. And he represents those people not willing to give up everything yet for the golden Medina, for the golden land. They don't want to give everything up. They want to remain attached. And then you had Harpo. Oh, you got to you, Harpo. I love Harpo. Harpo was the essential immigrant. He came to this country, and they say in Yiddish, Eugen and Moil offen. His mouth and his eyes were bright and open. But he was so stunned by this new world, he couldn't say a word. He did learn something, though. If you wanted something in this country, you had to get it. You had to take it. So if you remember him, he loved taking silverware, always putting silverware in his pants. He wanted to have a blonde. He chased her with a horn, right? And they really represented this immigrant community breaking in and creating this new kind of urban humor. Today we say urban humor, we're talking basically about African American humor. We say urban humor in the 20s and 30s, we're saying Jewish humor. Jewish humor was a product of centuries, as I mentioned, of being able to see the world as an outsider to a certain degree. And by seeing the world as an outsider, you're able and often accepted as being a true critic of what's going on. In the 1920s, particularly some of you may know, there was a great friction going on in this country, as there is today, between what is called frontier and the new cities. And the frontier was people who were bound to the land, etc., and were very wary of city slickers, very wary of what's going on out there, very wary of people talking fast. They couldn't stand that. I talk fast. I'm from New York. Talk fast. They were worried about people talk with their hands. They got very frightened. It was very scary to them. But something was happening. I mean, we know there were a couple of very well-known frontier comedians, right? You have Will Rogers, you have a few others, but they were totally swept away by radio. When radio came on, Will Rogers did okay, but the people who did very well were all these Jewish boys, for the most part boys, and we'll talk about why that's the case, who grew up in Eastern European homes, and who basically had realized that their entryway into America was by commenting and observing what they saw. And that's what a good storyteller does, a good comedian does, is he shows you what you think you've seen, and he shows you the other side of it. You go, oh yeah, oh yeah. And that oh yeah is terrific. That opens up so much to say, there's another side of things. It's like people studying Torah. They're always explaining, interpreting, deconstructing, reconstructing, putting it together, taking it apart. And that's really the joy. The joy of humor is that it takes things apart and puts it back together, perhaps in a different way than you saw it before. So the moves, I can't give you all the history of American Jews, but you know they moved finally out of the first settlements into the second set of settlements, and they began to be able to expand their financial horizons. And something happened. They began to go away for vacation to what was called the mountains. You're familiar with the mountains. They're not really mountains, they're hills, But they were called the Catskills, and they began to create what is now known as the Borscht Belt, which very few people still know about because the Catskills are no longer the Catskills of old. But in that place of the Catskills, and these hotels, and these bungalow colonies and casinos, we began to see a whole group of young comedians, Jewish comedians. And when I say Jewish comedians, I'm not saying that all of them dealt with Jewish subjects, and that's another thing I want to talk about in a while. But these comedians came and they had a training ground like no other possible training ground. And later, after the war, after the Second World War, they become the locus of all American humor, particularly from people like Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Sid Caesar and etc. They become really this new phenomena that goes national and is no longer Jewish humor. It's become truly American humor. The way it's no longer black jazz, it's American jazz. This is the greatest contribution we gave, perhaps, to the United States, was a laugh. And boy, do we need laughs. We need laughs. So going back to this period of radio, and then, of course, the beginning of movies, and then later on to television, we find that these people were trained so well. Why were they trained well? Look, today, if you go to a comedy club, right? How many people have been to a comedy club? I'm sure a few you had. Before COVID, of course. But the bottom line is this. The comedian gets a new audience every 50 minutes. Every 50 minutes, there's a new comedian. So that's really something that is pretty good. You have 20 minutes of good material, and you can keep playing that material again and again and again. So there's no real issues of anything. But what if you were in the Catskills and you were working at a hotel for 2 weeks, and your guests were there for 2 weeks? Your guests were there for 2 weeks. How can you do the same 20 minutes every night? You can't. So it became a place of great innovation. Remember Carl Reiner once spoke about being in one of the hotels, and they had done everything they could possibly do to make people laugh. Some of them worked as tumblers at the pool, getting people to do Simon Says and all kinds of bingo games, etc. And at nighttime, they danced with all the daughters of the people who were there. But they couldn't figure out what to do. So Carl Reiner says to the guy, I think it was either Mel Brooks or Sid Caesar, whatever, probably Sid Caesar. He says, you know what? Let's do an opera tonight. Let's do Rigoletto. And the guy says, his partner says, I don't know Rigoletto. So don't worry, they don't either. So they went out and they did a parody of Rigoletto, and it kept them going for another night till they had to figure something else out. And this kind of ingenuity, this kind of heavy-duty boot training, if you will, of the Borscht Belt really created all of the basic humor that, as I said, you know. Now, you can be a strict constitutionalist, or you can be a loose constitutionalist. You can be somebody who believes that Jewish humor has to be about Jewish stuff, about Jews. If you're going to make fun already, make fun of Jews. Why should we not be made fun of? We have the right to be made fun of. We have as much stupidity as any other community. It's important. The others say, no, it's Jewish style. There's a difference between kosher and kosher style. So Seinfeld is kosher style, right? Jewish style. Rarely deals with any, if you will, blatant Jewish subject matter. And when he does, it's usually very anti-Jewish in a way. For instance, being caught making out at Schindler's List, or the blabbermouth rabbi, or the nervous moil. The nervous moil really scared a lot of people, scared me too. But this idea that you have to have only Jewish material and talk about Jewish material is really a place I'd like to be on, because I think there is difference between Jewish style humor and Jewish humor. Perhaps one of the, I don't know if any of you have an opportunity, but if you can go to YouTube, there's a series in Israel called The Jews Are Coming. Everybody hear of Yehudim Ba'im, Yehudim Ba'im. And it is one of the more interesting shows that has ever really been produced. And it's based upon people who know something truly about Jewish history. And the parodies are remarkable, remarkable parodies. And these parodies basically assume that you basically have some basic knowledge of Jewish content, but they totally turn it over on its head, and you see things that you had not seen before. So this is really what I would like to just suggest before we open up. I could talk for hours and hours about this, but the bottom line is this: Jewish humor has to be a place where there's self-criticism, not self-hating, but self-criticism. Second, as I said earlier, it has to be anti-authoritarian. You can make fun of rich people. You try not to make fun of poor people. Even the schnorrer jokes, the schnorrer, the joke, the panhandler, the beggar jokes, even the schnorrer is different. The schnorrer is a poor Jew with middle-class values. He's doing you the greatest favor of your life for you to give him money. I'll give you a little story about that. How many people heard of Shalom Aleichem? Few? Great name, huh? Shalom Aleichem. Hello. I once wanted to change my name to Exit. Moshe Exit. I had my name up in lights everywhere, but it's a lot of pressure being that. So Shalom Aleichem heard a joke. And by the way, this is the way jokes get passed down. They don't get passed down as full stories. They often get passed down as punchlines. So they're called Sprichwörter in Yiddish, or in German, Sprichwörter. There's a little punchline or an axiom or a maxim of some kind, and then you build a story around it. So Shalom Aleichem tells a story about Baron Rothschild, the great Rothschild. The great Rothschild is not doing too well with his health, so placards are put all over the billboards of Vienna. Anybody who can come and can cure Rothschild will be richly rewarded. Well, you can imagine every doctor in Vienna is at this house. Nobody can do anything. Then they put other signs up. Anybody who can cure Rothschild, he's dying. Anybody who could save Rothschild will get half of his money. Wow. Well, a lot of people go out there. No one has success. And this little schnorrer, this guy in rags, comes to the Rothschild estate, the palace. He knocks on the door. A big butler comes in and says, "Yes, what do you want?" He says, "I've come to save Rothschild's life." He says, "You, look, you filthy rags." He pushes himself in. He goes from room to room to room to room. And he says, "Baron Rothschild, where are you? Where are you?" And finally he gets to the grand bedroom. And there he is, the master bedroom. And there is Rothschild lying on pillows all around him, looking quite ill. And he's frightened by this fellow who came in. "What are you doing here?" He says, "I've come to save your life. If you listen to everything I tell you, you will not die. I promise you, you will not die." He said, "How can you be so sure?" He says, "Well, you got to listen to me. Pack your little bag. I want you to move into my neighborhood with me. You live in a slum." He says, "Yes, I'll tell you, in my neighborhood, a rich man never died." So he took this punchline and he built a beautiful story around it. So I'd like to open up for comments and questions, but really, what makes me so in love with Jewish humor when it talks about Jewish things, because I'm more of a strict constructionist than some others are, is that it basically heightens my sense of belonging. And a good storyteller, a good comedian, always tries to create solidarity with the audience. He's got to get the audience on his or her side. There are a lot of side things I can talk about, why Jewish men predominantly for a period, and why now there are many more women in comedy. We can talk about the end of a certain period of hegemony by male comedians of Eastern European ancestry. We could talk about the sacred hour at 8 p.m. on CBS, the religious time when families got together. Believe it or not, this is hard to believe. I know it sounds like science fiction. They all came together in one room and they watched one television set. And they watched the Ed Sullivan Show. And he tried to satisfy everybody in that room. I don't want to, whoops.
It looks like Rabbi Waldoks accidentally left the room. We're getting him back as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience. We so apologize for this. And he's back.
I'm sorry about that. Just somebody pulled the plug. So what I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by myself was that basically we have the capacity to make fun of ourselves. It's an important thing to do. Obviously, the issue is what can you make fun of? But as I say, I think that with time, as Mel Brooks once said, tragedy plus time can be comedy. And as we look back on our own history, you'll see that we have the capacity to make fun of ourselves. And by making fun of ourselves, we really expand our consciousness. And the expansion of consciousness is what I think being a Jew is about. Not to be kept in a box. Oh, you can fault, we're all in boxes. I forgot this is Zoom, but we shouldn't stay in this box. And I hope soon we'll be able to get out of one. So I ask you for comments and questions. If you'd like to, you can put it in the chat, and I'll be glad to answer what I can or enter into a conversation with you, which I'd love to do. So give me a chance, and I'll be glad to converse with you.
Great. So we have I can go through the questions in the chat. So Jeff has a great question, which is, tell us your funniest joke.
There is no funniest joke, okay? There are funny jokes, and sometimes a joke fits better, it doesn't fit better. I happen to like a joke, I'll tell you, okay, this years ago, as a matter of fact, Joy Levitt, I don't know if she's still on, but Joy and I were on a trip. We went to India. You may have heard about India. It's all over there. And we were opening up a dialogue with the Dalai Lama, which sounds like a joke in itself. But one of the things in India, when you go to India, how many people have been to India? A lot of, just raise your hands. India. It's like going to another planet. And this was about 30 years ago. And we go to India, and one of the great concepts of India is reincarnation. You may have heard of it. We have it in Judaism too, reincarnation. Except in Judaism, you can't come back as a cow. You come back as a human. That's the little bit a difference. But you don't appreciate reincarnation till you've been in a car with a Hindu driver for 15 hours. And that Hindu driver wants to get to his next life before you want to get to yours. So we go up to the palace of the Dalai Lama, about 500 kilometers from New Delhi, with these roads. It was very amazing. And part of the job that we were doing, I was there with Yitzhak Greenberg, a few other wonderful people, Zalman Schachter. It was a great experience. But part of it was, we went to this great conference they had of all these monks. Now, you think you're a tough group to play for, but Tibetan monks, I tell you, they're not a jolly group, I must say. Pretty serious. So they had this thing, we had to give a presentation, and they asked me to go up and I'd talk to the people, warm them up. Break the ice, right? So before the other stuff. So I get up there and I start a story. And the story is a great story. And I'm talking, and nothing's coming up, nothing. It was like playing a mural. It was like a mural there. Nothing was reacting. Then a young monk pulls my sleeve and he says, excuse me, but they don't speak English. Aha. I said, oh, good. I felt relieved, totally relieved. And I said, okay, will you mind translating for me? She said, okay, I'll translate for you. So it's a story about Bill and Bob. You know Bill and Bob? Bill and Bob grew up together. They loved each other. They were buddies. They loved each other. They're from preschool all the way. They used to shower together. They used to play the towel and the tush game at the JCC. They were terrific. They got a little older. They're sitting around one afternoon and they make a l'chaim, and one raises a glass and the second raises a second glass. By the third glass, they get a little sloppy, and he says, Bill, I love you. I love you like a brother. I never liked my brother. I love you like a brother. By the seventh l'chaim, they're getting really emotional, and they say, okay, we can't live forever. That gets very profound by the 12th drink. Can't live forever. So I want to make a deal with you. Whoever gets there first calls and lets them know what it's about. All right, so they forget about it. It's a silly kind of thing in a drunken stupor. But then, as we say, noch 120 years after 120 years, Bill dies. And Bob is bereft. Bereft should be a Yiddish word. It's not a Yiddish word. It should be bereft. And he's depressed, and he can't do anything, and he can't get out of his bathrobe. His kids try to cheer him up. Nothing happens. Weeks go by. The phone rings. He picks it up. Who's this? It's Bill. Bill, is that you? You called? Wow, tell me all about it. He says, oh, it's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. You get up in the morning, and there's a 15-foot buffet. 15-foot buffet. Everything's fresh. You eat as much as you want. And then after that, you take a little nap, a beautiful lawn, and then you stop. If you don't know what that means, ask the person in the box next to you. You stop, and then you take another buffet, 24 feet, everything's fresh, you eat it, you take a nap, a dribble, and then you do it again. He says, Bill, that's unbelievable. Heaven sounds wonderful. It's amazing. She says, heaven schmeven, I'm a bull in Wisconsin. They love the reincarnation jokes in Tibet more than they do probably on the Upper West Side. But whatever it is, that's one of my favorite jokes. Anything else?
Alan asked, how do you explain the non-Jewish appreciation of Jewish humor?
That's a great question. I think the appreciation, it isn't appreciated by everybody, by the way, but there are quite a few. Is this, and this is changing now because we are less outsiders than we were. But in the 20s and 30s, we did very, very well in breaking into American entertainment because as the outsider, we were given more license, that our observations, that they were stuck in the forest and couldn't see the trees, but we were the outside looking in. And that gave a lot of, if you will, a lot of cachet to Jewish humorists and Jewish comedians. And that's true in the beginning of television as well, when you had shows like the Show of Shows, that was the SNL of that time, it was live television, Sid Caesar, tremendous writing staff of people who went on to be tremendously important in humor, Neil Simon, Woody Allen, Mel Brooks certainly was writing for them. And basically they brought this kind of outsiderness, and they were always winking at the audiences. Winking particularly at the Jewish audiences. It's quite interesting. So for instance, you may remember that John Belushi had a character called the Samurai, right? But it was preceded by 50, 60 years by Sid Caesar, who had a similar character, who was a samurai, and his name was Take Meshiga. Take Meshiga, which means certainly crazy. And of course, they were winking at their audience. It's like one of the most remarkable talents we have today is Sacha Baron Cohen. Sacha Baron Cohen is extraordinary talent. So here he is. I'm watching Borat in Arizona for some reason with my wife. We're on vacation, and I'm cracking up. My wife's cracking up. Nobody else is cracking up. Okay, and he's giving us a wink through the whole movie. I'm an anti-Semitic bastard, but you know what? I'm not really. So he speaks in Hebrew instead of Kazakhstani. So anybody who knows some Hebrew, say he's winking at us. The Jews in the audience says, "Don't worry. My job is to uncover the anti-Semitism of the Goyim, not the anti-Semitism that you might not know." So this talent of being both inside and outside at the same time gives a lot of credibility to Jewish comedians. And unfortunately, I think we're losing a little bit of the outsider status, and we're actually seeing, I think not as quality product as we once saw. Mel Brooks continued, by the way. I think he should live and be well. He's now in his 90s, but he was really a great example of how you took Jewish humor and brought it into everything you did, and every character, every movie had a Jewish place in it, but more importantly, he saw what was a genre like Frankenstein or a genre like Vertigo or whatever it was, or Birds, and he just took it and turned it over and became a very successful comedian by doing so.
Speaking of
anybody else?
Yes, speaking of Mel Brooks, so Faye asked, what if the producers had been written by a non-Jew?
Well, I think you would have had look. I want you to know the producers, even written by a Jew, didn't get a lot of. It came out in 1968, and the movie went nowhere. It was considered in bad taste in 1968. One of the most fantastic movies. I mean, if you really like Zero Mostel and you like Gene Wilder, you could not find them in any better roles. Nobody who did it on Broadway. Nathan Lane I like, but nobody did it as well as Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. Yes, I think it was written by a non-Jew. It would be more questionable. But as I say, even written by a Jew, it was not. It took a long time before, and who would have expected that it became such a hit on Broadway? You know, to finance that Broadway show, he had to go to every Jew he knew. He went to his brother-in-law, a dentist in Florida, told him about a guy who he plays golf with. He literally, so when he won the Tony, I don't know if you were there, if you saw the performance, when they say, when he won it, and all the producers had to come up, about 65 Jewish guys of a certain age are behind him. And he says, here I am surrounded by, and I love this term, an avalanche of Jews. And they basically made that into a hit. What does Mel Brooks say about that? He says, this is the only way I can respond to something that is unfathomable, horrific, is literally that we're dancing and they're not. So I think a non-Jew would have written it. I think it would have been buried even deeper than the original film was buried in 1968. Anyone else?
Do we have any other questions? We have a couple.
Open.
We have a couple comments. Someone wrote, Sahar wrote, Neil
Comments are
Simon.
good too. I like comments. Yes.
Yeah. So we have Neil
Yes.
Simon wrote a play about his time writing on your show of shows.
Yes, he did. And there was a great film as well called, you have to remind me, it was Peter O'Toole. Remember the name of the film, anybody?
Was that Laughter on the 23rd
It was a
Floor?
beautiful film. No, that was a separate. That was a play about the people who
My Favorite
wrote the
Year.
show. Whatever. It'll come to me in a minute. My Favorite Year. Very nice. Who got that? That's beautiful.
That was Ellen
yeah,
who got that.
Yeah, that was an amazing phenomenon. That was an amazing phenomenon to have. Who came up with that? Who
That
came
was
up with
Ellen
My
Goodman.
Favorite Year? Whatever. Ellen Goodman. Good. Thank you, Ellen. What I found, what is interesting about the capacity of Jewish humor to basically deal with all situations in life, and I think that's so important. It does not only deal with anti-Semitism. Jewish humor is not a defense mechanism. It is in certain ways and not in other ways. It does not stop bullets. Okay, remember that. Be the greatest comedian in the world, he's not going to stop bullets. However, what you can do with the humor is you can expand a little bit, as I said, of your consciousness and realize that everything you were involved in may not be reality, but is some distortion of reality. The horrors of our people experience were distortions of what reality could be. They were not things to be taken necessarily as the way things should be. And thank God, with a lot of strength and a lot of courage, we were able to overcome that. So I think that basically you have a need to really deal with all the aspects of life. Jews in Eastern Europe, and there were a few Sephardic funny people, not many, but there were a few Sephardic funny people. People often accuse me that I'm too Eastern European oriented in the Jewish humor, but it's because there are very few. They're great on charoset. If you ever want great charoset, you always invite a Sephardi to the Seder. But for jokes, I don't invite Sephardi. Israel changed that a little bit because Israel developed a very strong humor tradition, and it continues to this very day. Any other comments?
Yeah, we have
Questions,
a question.
arguments.
Yeah, we have
answers.
a question from Jeff. He asks, "Who does the best Jewish humor today?"
Well, there's quite a. You're finding a lot of Jewish humor which we don't have access to. There's a lot of very funny things going on in the Haredi community. It's hard to, we don't associate Haredi with humor, but they love to have these bat chanim at weddings and parties and stand-ups, and they really have now a guy named Lipa Schmelzer. Anybody know Lipa's work? He does parodies of hip hop in Yiddish, and it's really amazing to see. But I like very much, of course, Jon Stewart. I think he did a great job, and I think he really, even though I don't necessarily see him as somebody who's very Jewishly knowledgeable, which he's not, but he had a sensitivity that whether he liked it or not, he was being seen as a Jew. And that gave him a sense of some responsibility. But he was not afraid of making fun of Jews as well, which I think is really a very healthy thing that you're able to do. Now, are you thinking that a Jew who makes fun of something Jewish is going to create anti-Semitism? It doesn't work that way. If it was that easy to make an anti-Semite, then we could revolve the process and stop having anti-Semites. But the bottom line is this: people have to have the capacity to laugh at themselves. That's what a sense of humor is about. When your bull is gored, when your cow is gored, your sacred cow is gored, if you can laugh at that, then you have a sense of humor. However, if you think everything's going to be basically made very palatable for you, then you probably have a very dull evening and not necessarily a good sense of humor.
Thank you.
So what else do I like today? I'll mention a few other names that I like. There's a couple of comedians now that are working across the board from the Haredi community into the big community. There's a guy in New York named Modi Rosenfeld, if you know his work. I think he's pretty good. Sarah Silverman's been quiet of late, but Sarah Silverman was quite a filthy comedian, but but very, very funny. And there are more and more, but not all of them are doing Jewish material. There's a wonderful comedian, if you've never seen him, I really recommend, is Gary Gulman, Gulman. He had a special on Netflix about a year and a half, two years ago. Very, very funny. But again, there are Jews who are comedians. They're not necessarily doing Jewish humor. They were attacked by a mile when they were 8 days old, but they're not necessarily doing Jewish humor per se. So that's where the sticky point comes up. What do you expect when someone says they're doing Jewish humor? Talking about Jews or being a Jew talking?
Great.
Somebody, I see a question there. We still have a little time, but not really.
We actually are at time. Thank you so much, Rabbi Waldoks. Thank you everyone for coming.
I'm sorry we're breaking up so early. Yeah. It was a tough trip getting there today, but I got there.
Yeah, so we're so glad you were able to come. So everyone take a 5-minute break, stretch, grab some cheesecake, grab some coffee. We still have tracks all until 5 a.m. So we'll see you at 11:30 for the next track. Thanks.